Hello and welcome to another video. As you've seen from the title, I'm talking about sanding the paint. I'm sharing my experience, and I'm also just showing you the amount of hours, and I am not joking, this is probably hundreds. It's definitely more than 100. It wouldn't be surprising if it was 3. But hundreds of hours that it takes to remove the paint from the car. Now, a little bit of history. My car had 4 layers of paint before what you started to see here. The first layer is from the factory. I think it's called Nautilus Blue. It's a dark blue. I don't remember the exact name of it. There's a second layer of also the dark blue that was done by a previous owner. What I was told by the guy that sold me the car is that the previous owner had a mate down the road that painted the car for him. So there's second layer of blue. When I received the car, when I bought the car 7 years ago, the bonnet was blue and then white, and then blue and then white again. The peeling of the paint was just terrible, and I had a blank canvas, so because I liked mustard yellow, I just went for mustard yellow, and I never regretted it afterwards. So I did paint the car myself in my garage, in my single car garage back then, once, and I was not happy with the results, so 2 years later I did the same job again in the same garage, and unfortunately I just didn't have the confidence to take the car apart, and I did not have the space that I now have to actually take the car apart. So this time, job's properly done. Anyway, so I'm telling you this to give you an explanation as to how I ended up with 4 layers of very thick paint in my Elan. Now, as far as the tricks and tips and sharing what I've learned from this job, the first thing that I've learned is that you only take this job up if you have plenty of time. Sanding paint, the prep work for painting is extremely time consuming. That's why if you need it done properly by a company that will do a good job, they will charge a lot. It's not the paint costs 250 quid. And when I say 250 quid, I actually bought enough paint to paint a Ford Transit. I bought far more than I needed, and that was just 250 quid. All of the bits included, lacquer, paint, primer, blah blah blah. 250 quid a kit, done. Man hours. If you don't have slaves, it's gonna cost. And as far as I'm aware, slavery has been abolished for quite a long time. What a shame. Anyway, so it's a very time-consuming job. All of the footage you're seeing has been sped up to at least 10 times, but, it wouldn't be surprising if some of these footage that you're seeing around me, it's been sped to 50 times. When I was doing my editing, I actually had to put some of the stuff 50 times because it was just so much. Anyway, going into the tips. The first tip that I can give you is that if you have very, very thick paint and multiple layers of paint, one thing that I've learned, and I've learned this quite late in the process actually, was to get one of these scraping tools. This has a very hardened metal at the top. It's not hardened steel, it's a different thing. I think it's cobalt. It's definitely one of the types of metal that it's used in the metal drill bits. I can't remember which one it is. But this little tool, I bought a pack with 2 of them, one narrow and one wide. If you are going to do this, I would say don't bother buying the wide one, because let me see if I can find my wide one. Here's my wide one, here's my narrow one. This is just not even 2 fingers wide. This is roughly a finger wide. I found myself not using the wide one because it's harder to control. When you have this width, first of all, the car doesn't have a lot of surfaces that are flat to enough width to justify this. So you'd have to then lean left, lean right, and then cut in the middle, and you're effectively not making use of the width. And when you have a surface this wide that is flat, it's actually, you need to put a lot more pressure, and it's harder to control the amount of pressure and then cut too far in. So I bought a kit with two. It was between 40 and 50 quid, and I barely ever used the wide one. I've only used the narrow one. Even though it seems counterproductive to use the narrow one, because of the easy use and the less pressure that you need to do to scrape off the paint, I found it to be a lot more efficient than using the wide one. So yeah, so the first thing I can say is, if you have thick paint, these pay off. Especially if you have multiple layers of paint, you can start scraping the paint off and you figure out what kind of pressure you need to do, and then you can remove a whole layer of paint in one go, get to that primer, remove that layer of primer, get to the second layer of paint, and then you can be more careful. So, godsend tool. I was advised to use this by a fella that lives in Whitley Bay on the Facebook group actually, and thank you so much. I forgot his name. I'm gonna edit it here. Actually, I'm not going for privacy reasons, but yeah, I'm super thankful for that tip, and that saved me many hours of work. And I hope that if you're watching this and you're going to do this job, I hope it saves you also a lot of time. It's an expensive tool. It feels like a lot of money for just a tiny bit of metal. It pays off. It really pays off. I can only say good things about this, and I just regret not having bought it earlier in my process, because I probably would have saved easily 10 hours of my time if I bought this on day one. So, first tip, it's the scraper tools. The second tip, it's not really a tip, it's just a little bit of an explanation of what I've done. The other tool that I have used a lot was an Orbital Sander. Not a big deal Orbital Sander, it was a 35 pound Orbital Sander. I have it here. Amazon purchase. If you're going to buy a sander to do this, this one was perfect for me. Then the two things that I find that are very important if you're going to buy one is to get a 5-inch diameter one. There are bigger ones, but the problem is that if you're going to use this for a lot of time, you need to have better control, and something bigger won't actually be more efficient, because it's just harder to control. It makes you more tired, and then you need to stop, so you're not working as long, and it's not giving you, it's diminishing returns to go any bigger than the 5-inch diameter. And one thing that's extremely important, it's to get one with the venting system in place and the pocket to collect the sand dust, the paint dust. You still have to use protection. I use IPU filter 3. It's the finest filter available commercially without having to pay 80 quid for each pair. My pairs, I think they were like 30 quid a pair or so, and I had to buy 3 different pairs or so. It doesn't matter. But the reason is not because this saves you on the filters. You still have to use the filters. It's just that the holes in here and the fact that the way it works sucks in the air actually make this sandpaper not clog as often. And if it clogs less often, you don't need to clean it, you don't need to change the pads often, you are being more efficient at removing the sand. I've learned that. I was just lucky, really. I only figured that out, that that this was extremely efficient when I moved on to something else, which is the next tool that I'm going to show you. So the next tool, it's the oscillating tool. This is usually called a multi-tool or a multi-function tool. It only vibrates, and it's got these attachments that have a hook and loop. front, and then you can put your sandpaper in there. I do have a tip about this, and the tip is to not buy the already cut hook and loop bits for it, because this is not a lot of area, and when you're using this you're always focusing on a narrow spot. That's why you're using this in a car. It's because it's a narrow spot and you just want to make it quick. So the pads already cut into place are very, very efficient, but they're extremely expensive. And what I have here is actually just a hook and loop from a roll that I cut into shape for it. I could have cut it and also lined up the holes with this, but another tip for you is to get the adapters that have the holes that line up with the holes of the machine. The adapters I found cheaply did not line up. I could not find adapters for a reasonable price that had the holes that lined up, so I ended up not making the holes into my offcuts. So that would have had the effect that I just mentioned about in my Orbital Sander. But with this one here, it's just a matter of getting another cut, peel it out, price a new one. If you're going to do a whole car, don't just expect one of these adapters to work. The hook and loop gets damaged just by vibrating in heat. So I've used 6 of them. This is the 6th one. So you get the picture. You're going to need a few of them. It's going to be annoying, costs money, but it's the way it happens. But this, although you can't do everything, that is narrow spot with this, and it's less efficient than using your hands in a lot of spots. One of the spots is actually around here. This area around here, you can do by hand and just push the sandpaper in that direction, but you still need to have something to scrape it in that direction to remove all of the paint efficiently. So that's where this kind of stuff comes in. So with that in mind, just a little bit of a tip. So yeah, definitely a very useful tool. Get your own roll of hook and loop sandpaper to use it. Makes it a lot cheaper. And don't forget to get extra pads for this. I've used this with a hoover on this side with a vacuum cleaner. Limited effect because I didn't have holes. But anyway, moving on. Now this is the thing that I found most surprising as I was doing my work. It's actually the hook and loop sandpaper that I got. I just got 6-degree hook and loop sandpaper because I was thinking of going cheapskate on my multi-tool, and I tried to just cut a bit and sand by hand, some contours here and there. And what I found is that this 6-degree sandpaper with the hook and loop backing has a bit of padding as you hold it, and it spreads the pressure of your hand better. So if you're sanding the car, what you find is that if you're sanding by hand, what you find is that wherever your fingers are, you get the paint in those areas building up, because that's where you're putting pressure. But with this sandpaper, I was actually spreading more of the weight, and I didn't need to use a sanding block, which was extremely nice because I could feel how much pressure I was putting into the sandpaper. I could feel how the car panels were being sanded and so on, and it was just nice. And for the big bulk of it with a 6-degree, you don't need to worry much about creating ridges because you always go through it later with something else. And that comes to the next tool that I fabricated, and this is a very straightforward sanding block. I have 2 sanding blocks. I have a commercial sanding block which I used with a finer grits, and I have this sanding block which is literally wood from a pallet. I cut a chunk of wood from a pallet that had roughly the right size for my hand. I've glued onto it the hook and loop, and yeah, well, before gluing the hook and loop onto it, I actually used my sanding machine to make it flat. Of course, you know, what's the point of having a straight block if it isn't flat? And yeah, efficient, cheap, and it just did the job, and very, very handy. So, as far as sanding the car, those are actually the 4 tools I've used. I experimented with a couple of other tools that I had in the garage. I've tried to use, what's the name of it? An Orbital Sander that is air-powered by the air compressor. And I had issues with that because even though my air compressor is powerful enough, I think the airlines are a bit of a bottleneck in that system, so it wasn't suitable for it. It also had a disc diameter that was bigger than the 5 millimeters, which made it a bit harder to control as well. Even though it's not particularly heavier, it's got a beefy air supply going in, which makes it difficult to control. So definitely an electric powered one was the best thing to use, and I just kept using it. Yeah, that's pretty much the only tips that I have. A lot of things that I was sanding in the car were done by hand. I had to actually fabricate also a tiny bit of pallet wood. I don't have it here, but I'll show you what I've done just by explaining it. For the back of the car, around the what's the name of it? The trunk, not the trunk, the boot lid. Around the boot lid you have that little contour that then has the seal, and to do that, what I have done is actually grab one of these pallet things. I put the hook and loop paper in there, and then I put my sandpaper in there, and then scraped it around, and that was extremely efficient. What I've tried, which hasn't worked at all, is sandblasting. Sandblasting was a disaster. I don't know if the issue is with my air supply. I should have enough air supply to work with it. I have sandblasted rust out of metal bits just fine before, but trying to sandblast narrow spots was not very efficient. I started off by trying to actually soda blast, and I still have a bit of baking soda here. Yeah, bicarbonate of soda. I've done a bit of research. It suggested that this is the thing to use in fiberglass. It won't damage the fiberglass. It will only remove the paint. It did not remove the paint in my case. It was just going everywhere, not doing anything. So with that in mind, bicarbonate of soda didn't work for me. I seriously doubt it would work for anyone else. Sandblasting. I used playground sand. Playground sand is not sharp sand, so it's probably why it didn't work for me. Well, it did work. It was just I had to rotate a lot of sand to actually get things done, and it wasn't an efficient way to move forward. I also bought a big bag of sharp sand, which is sand that you mix cement with. Sieved through it to get the finer granules to use in my sandblaster. It was better than playground sand, but still not very efficient. So I have sandblasted some very narrow spots that it's hard to get on with your fingers, but mostly mostly it's all actually been done with by hand. Yeah, so sandblasting didn't work. Bicarbonate of soda blasting didn't work. I did not do any paint strippers. I was advised by 3 different people not to use paint strippers. One of them was the guy who sells the paint strippers. He said, "Are you doing metal?" I said no. He said, "I'm not going to sell you this." They know what they're doing. They don't want to unhappy customers. I was very happy with the service I got there. Unfortunately, I never needed anything from that shop, but I will go back there. You know, if someone turns down your customs with honesty, they deserve more customs. So yeah, I was also told by 2 different painter guys that they don't use stripper, not even in metal, actually. Sorry for all the coughing. I'm still recovering from COVID, actually, but I'm good enough to record a video. Anyway, we've got 20 minutes of a video. I think that's enough. If there's any more footage, well, you get the idea. It's a lot of work. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something that is useful for you. And I will see you in the next video, hopefully, once I figure out what that video will be. Until then, thanks for watching.